everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie, and today I'm talking about what I learned from the book Watership Down. This lovely book was recommended to me by my sister, who read Watership Down in her high school English class, her senior year, and I was pleasantly surprised by this book. Watership Down was published in 1972 by a man named Richard Adams. This story was born from ideas Richard Adams had in telling stories to his daughters, and then on a long, he said like 100-mile car ride, he told his daughters a story about rabbits, in particular 2 rabbits named Hazel and Fiver. This man had lived and fought through World War II, had not been very experienced as an author, wasn't pursuing that. After enough times of telling the story, his daughters really pressured him to write this as a book. It was too good to be wasted on just bedtime stories, in their words. And he started working in the evenings, writing his book, and there is such strange heart and character in this that, like, I have some things to talk about, things that I learned that inspired me and gave me, like, sort of a lesson in writing and world building. Most of the insane world building we're aware of today is magical and intense, and there's hard magic systems and very detailed worlds and culture, and he found a very simple way to do that with these rabbits. He'd been through war. Instead of writing stories about soldiers and battles, he wrote rabbits, soldiers, and battles. The characters so well done and this world so well done. I love the stories and the lore that was constructed for these rabbits. There are a few things I learned from this book and reasons I loved this book that really mostly taught me about world building. Jumping right into that, this man did his research. He researched rabbits, the way they live, the lifestyle that they have, and he wrote it so well and intimately without disconnecting too much from humans. He found a really decent middle ground. He invented words that would fit the needs of the rabbits, that they wouldn't just say to go above ground to feed. They would have a specific word for that. It feels rich, and it feels like you're in a legitimate community that was built up and that has its own background. He never had the rabbits do anything they couldn't do physically, even though he gave them a little bit more awareness to have this story told in the first place. The rabbits have lore about life and death, about their creator, and it's just really beautiful. And something about it that I find was done really well. He did kind of that thing where you don't necessarily fully understand what everything is, but because of the exposure you start to understand. But it didn't feel like when you're thrown into a magical world and you have absolutely no relation to it. You've been on a grassy hill before, but you get to see it from the rabbit perspective, and you feel connected to that. You can relate to that as a human person, even though it's a very different life. And I think something important to learn from that is that you learn so deeply the truth of a culture, in this case the truth of rabbit society, and you kind of add it in as you go as fluff to enrich the environment, and then you give those characters, in this case rabbits, great personality and motivation to carry the plot and the story itself. So you feel like you're in that world because it's the rabbits talking about their lives and experiences, which is so different from ours. But we can understand it. We can understand that the rabbits have a desire to mate and create their homes to be teachers to the youth. You can understand their desire for safety, and how they are running from a life of noise and war and danger. I think if we do research into something, even if you're not writing an actual culture that exists, if you're getting inspiration from it, it can't hurt to go in depth. It can hurt if you never write the book, but if you do enough research that you have that in your mind and you can kind of supplement as you go, then it's going to feel more realistic and less appropriated. It's going to feel respectful. And I don't really know that you can appropriate rabbit culture, but I think you can translate that really well, that you learn the facts and how a system works for these rabbits enough to tell a beautiful story about them that humans love. On top of that, in Richard Adams' introduction to Watership Down, he discusses how He says there's no allegory intended for the story, that it's just a story he told to his kids on a car ride. And there's beauty to that, but the reality of it is that individual readers can find allegory. But it's just like Tolkien has talked about, people quote him often talking about allegory, and they're like, well, he can't say that because this obviously talks about this. He can say that because some writers don't have a specific intention, but their lives naturally are going to produce some kind of theme. Like their experiences are going to give them perspective, and perspective, when shared, lends someone to think of allegory. And so this man had been through war and was familiar with Nazi oppression. And there are some scenes that are very much reflective of communism, the dangers of war, and yet you don't feel like he's preaching, because his point is not to not talk about his experiences, but use what he knows to write a story about rabbits. You know, in the end, it's always about the rabbits, and they are the most important thing, these characters. But because of his experiences that enriches the story, it goes hand in hand with the research that he did. Something beautiful I find about this type of allegory, even though Tolkien has said that he wasn't intending a specific message, you can still find that you know that this man knows what it's like to form a brotherhood with fellow soldiers, to endure the weight of war and the depression that comes from it. You can see that. And in this story, you can see some of that too, but it's not because he's preaching at you, it's just because this is something he experienced. So what a wonderful thing stories are, to give us that opportunity to share those experiences and to write a good story. You can't really write a story if you're not gonna self-insert in some way. I don't think anyone ever truly does that. Even if it's like, I wish I could fly, so I'm gonna write a character who can fly. It might even be as like simple as that. It might not be trauma and war and the bad things you've been through, but the things that people go through greatly affect what they write about. It just, that makes sense, you know? And if you don't know it, in the case you aren't a rabbit, you haven't been a rabbit, if you do your research, you can at least make it feel like you are respectfully aware of another culture. And again, if you're doing it about animals, it can create a rich environment, but if you're doing it about people in a culture that is different from yours, it can benefit you so much to become familiar with it enough to write about it respectfully, and to not just write about stereotypes and all that stuff, because also, on top of everything, aside from disrespect, it's so tacky. Now, if he was like, I don't know, he could have made the rabbits so surface level and boring and kiddie. That's another thing. This book is not written for children. I haven't watched the adaptations made, but I know that they like have scarred some people in their childhood because they watched it because their parents were like, it's for kids, it's about rabbits. No, it's not for kids. But because of that, you can see why it lends itself to allegory. Or you can be like, that sounds like fascism or whatever, but and it might be, but it's not because he's trying to tell that story. He's like, hey, I've seen this, and I'm gonna put my rabbits in that situation and see what they go through, because it's about what your character is going through. I highly recommend this. I was super surprised by my emotional attachment to these characters. I stayed up late out of my worry for the characters at the end of the book, and it was just so beautifully written and beautifully handled. I feel like I have an appreciation for rabbits, and I also feel like they're real, tangible characters, which I don't know if he ever truly recognized what an impressive job he did and how well he constructed this world and these characters, but I hope he did, because this book was a surprising read and a lot deeper than I expected, and I loved it. So if you're looking to understand how research can affect your world building in a deep and rich way, I highly recommend Watership Down. If you're looking for interesting, quirky characters with sincerity and heart, then I highly recommend this book. Let me know in the comments if you've read Watership Down or if you have any interest in reading it. I highly recommend Watership Down, and I hope you have a wonderful day.